Okay, so you find out what your mission's going to be, and you're going to Kiska?
Yes, and we first put into ADAC in the Aleutians with a ship, and originally we were supposed to be disembarked at ADAC, but our Colonel Frederick didn't like the setup there, so he arranged for us to go to Amchitka, which was just the island across from Kiska. We arrived in Amchitka on the 24th of July. We trained in there. When we first got up there, we just slept in foxholes in the tundra. And later we got some tents. Then, as our training went on, we found out that we were to be the lead force into Kiska.
Okay.
Two of our regiments were to go in by rubber boat 24 hours before the main force,
Okay.
to take the higher elevations and do what they could do to destroy Japanese artillery and so forth. My regiment was supposed to jump in reserve behind the Japanese lines. They had picked our jump area from a Navy photograph that looked like something was smooth there among the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, came the 2nd of August, the invasion was scheduled. The night, let's say, I believe the night before, looked like the whole Pacific Fleet had bombarded Kiska. It just looked like thunder and lightning all night. We could watch it from Amchitka. Our two regiments had already taken off, and I'll tell you a little story about it. One of the destroyers that was taking them, during our training at Amchitka, I got on board, and I saw this guy. He looked familiar, and all of a sudden I yelled out, "Hey, Maori," and he looked at me and he says, "Hey, Bodine." He was a buddy of mine during my mining days around Colorado, and we used to go to dances in little schoolhouses together and things. And there he was a boat commander of the landing boats. Well, anyway, we'll get back to the invasion. The two regiments, the 1st and 3rd Regiment, were taken by ship and went in rubber boats. We, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was out at the landing strip in Amchitka being weighed in for our boarding the plane, C-47s, to go to fly and jump. When I was weighed, I weighed 340 pounds, because each of us had a week's ammunition. We had concussion grenades, fragmentation grenades, our rifles. I even carried a hatchet. That was my favorite weapon. By the way, they had made special knives for our outfit, stilettos with a sharp point on the top, which would go through a helmet. Yeah, that was used very effectively later on by the outfit. Because most of our work was when we go in early or do sneaking around, we're trained to dispatch the people with the knives rather than making it. Yeah, we are trained all the vulnerable places to use the knives, and that's another story. But anyway, so 1st and 3rd Regiment went in at Kiska. They got up there and they found they were stabbing dummies in gun emplacements. The Japs had left dummies to fool you. One of the fellows found hot coffee. So there's quite a story between what the Navy tells and what our people tell, and they're not exactly coincidental. But some way the Japs had managed to get out of the island between the Navy surrounding and the real story I'd like to hear someday. But as best I know, the Japanese got a cruiser in there and got some what they called supply submarines in there, and they got them out. But anyway, they didn't really know that, and as our regiment, the 1st and 3rd Regiments, took their assignments, the 10th Mountain Division got into a firefight between two ridges. The fog was just, from what I was told, you just couldn't see anything. Radio communications, due to magnetic and atmospheric conditions up there, was just nothing. So they fought most of the day back and forth among themselves, and we had several units pinned down between them. There were some casualties on this. The Canadians came in there, not of our outfit, but of the Canadian Army, and they had a lot of casualties. They would find these, what they called spider trap foxholes that the Japanese had, and they'd sneak up and drop a grenade in them, and then another guy'd get in one, and another guy'd come in and drop a grenade on his own person. Well, it was sort of a mess. While we were out there at the landing strip at Amchitka, boarded the planes, then we sat, and the fog came in and everything else, and finally our mission was scrubbed, and the word got out from Amchitka that they wouldn't need us for reserve. Fortunately for that, they later found out our drop zone was nothing but huge rounded boulders, and it just showed up as a black area on the photograph. If we had jumped in there, we had probably all been broken up. But anyway, another lucky thing in my life. So after the Kiska campaign, apparently they didn't know what to do with this outfit, and then the word came that they probably could use them in Europe. We went back to San Francisco. We got back to Camp Stoneman in California, San Francisco, and we're on the 2nd of September. We were given 10 days leave, and we reported back to Camp Fort Ethan Allen again, and were put through intensive training, night training. Mount Mansfield is one of the highest mountains in Vermont. We were ordered to go at night with full packs and see how fast we could get to the top of Mount Mansfield and come back again. It was rather interesting work. I think we astounded the people that were giving us these tests. Then the next thing I know, I'm called into the medical detail. They examined me. They sent me over, found out I was half blind in my left eye. And in a few days, I was given orders to report to the an combat engineer outfit in Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Excuse me a minute, I'll get a drink here.
You're fine.
And found out I was assigned to the 204th Combat Engineers in Fort Devens. My wife accompanied me from Burlington down on the train. She found quarters in Ayer, Massachusetts. So here I was, a platoon officer for an engineer company without any engineering training. Again, I did it by, I guess, or by God. the Boy Scout training I had, I think, was wonderful. But anyway, I was a platoon officer with them. We trained at Fort Devens, and then we went to Elkins, West Virginia for more rigorous training and lived in tents in the mud in Elkins.
And explain what the training is like for...
It was road work and building bridges and things like that. And so my platoon became known as Bo's Commandos because the only thing I knew how to train them was what I learned in the Special Forces. And these fellows were a bunch of Italian guys from New York and the Bronx, and I got these guys, trained them everything I knew about commando work, and they lorded it over the other outfits and called themselves Bo's Commandos. Okay. Then we went from there to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, and this was in December of '43. And from Camp Kilmer to Fort Dix, and then eventually we boarded a ship in New York, and the ship broke down, so we were taken off the ship and sent to a encampment up the Hudson River temporarily, and then we were finally brought back down to New York and boarded the Queen Elizabeth. We left in January 2nd, I think it was, on the Queen Elizabeth, not knowing where we were going, but found out later it was England. And we ran into the Queen Elizabeth traveled by herself. She was so fast. She could usually outrun most of the destroyers in calm water. We ran into heavy seas somewhere above Iceland and between Iceland and Greenland.
Now, at this time, are you more anxious about being on a ship, do you think, because of what had happened before?
No, to tell you what, I forgot to tell you, my platoon had sunk in a landing craft in the Bering Sea in our training. And I managed to get my whole platoon out of that without one weapon being lost or anybody. So I was getting confidence back again. Okay. But anyway, everybody was seasick on the Queen Elizabeth. I never got seasick. So some nights there I was with the English mess officer with great big coal shovels shoveling vomit from the deck into garbage cans. And so I guess I became sort of a guy with the British Navy because I was probably the only fellow that wasn't seasick. Well, we finally turned into Greenwich, England, or Scotland, and we were boarded on a train and taken down to England. We were in England in various encampments through the southern part, ranging from the Bristol area all the way over to the London area. And I was promoted then to company commander of the B Company, 204th Engineers. So in our training, one time, we were training near a large English estate not far from London called Stoner. I got my fellows out to have a volleyball game, and our net was stretched from a huge tree to another tree. And in the course of that game that evening, I fell and hit my head against the tree and partially knocked myself out. Later in the evening, as I was going to my bivouac, I fell down and my ears start ringing, and I think I had a mild panic attack of what, was I going to die or what? Mm-hmm. But the medics came out and took a look at me. They checked me out. They sent me into the hospital the next day, and the doctor checked my heart, and he says, "You got a heart like a lion. Are you afraid of being overseas?" Well, fortunately I didn't hit him, but I said to him, I said, "You know, this is my third trip overseas, and if I wanted to go back, I'm savvy enough to do it different ways than this." So I said, "I don't need your medicine," so I went back to duty. And they kept trying to send me back to the hospital again, and I wouldn't go. I said, "I'm not going to be insulted like that again." So finally, I think it was, we were busy building roads for the invasion. And we knew something was going up because we were ordered to repair bridges and get them down, the troops down regardless of anything. We even went so far as to steal a 5-ton truck and a big trailer and a bulldozer from the Air Force and use it. But anyway, we got that mission done, and the next thing I know, our battalion surgeon said to me, he says, "George," he says, "I've got a friend in the Air Force Hospital in Oxford, and he used to be chief of staff of neurosurgery at Presbyterian Hospital in New York. He said, "I'd like him to take a look at you." And I said, He says, "Just go in for the weekend." Well, I went in. I never got out. They examined me and everything, and the next thing I know, they sent me before a board, and they said, "We're sending you back to the United States." And I says, "Why?" "There's something wrong with you. You don't want to fall down leading your troops," and gave me all this story. I was really too scared to ask then. They scared the wits out of me.
Right.
So I said, "Well, I really don't want to go." I said, "I've trained these guys." They said, "Well, you don't have any choice." They put me in the hospital again there at Oxford. The next thing you know, they put me on a train, and a hospital train, headed for Scotland. And on the stretcher next to me was some charming USO gal that had gotten sick. So we chatted all the way up to Scotland. We got up to Scotland, and D-Day occurred. And here I was, all this training and everything, laying in a hospital bed, and in Scotland. It was just outside of Glasgow. Next thing I know, I'm put on a hospital plane to be flown back to the United States. This time I had my orders with me, and it was a C-54, and we took off and we flew to Iceland, Reykjavik. We took off from Reykjavik, and halfway out from Reykjavik, our hydraulic system on our flaps went crazy, and the flaps start dropping, and the pilots start cranking them out. And we did that and limped all the way into Stevensville, Newfoundland, and landed there. And they apparently repaired that there, had breakfast. I had opened my orders and found the medical thing. It said, "Suspected brain tumor." So that was the first hint of anything on me. Mm-hmm. So then they flew us to New York, put us in the Air Force Hospital at Mitchell Field. From there, I went to the hospital at Fort Benjamin Harrison. was put in there. They put me through every neurological test you could. They couldn't find anything. They finally doped me up, and I was literally semi-conscious for about 2 weeks. They decided to try the post-concussion trauma business. Then they transferred me to Wakeman General Hospital in Camp Atterbury, Indiana, which was a neurosurgical plastic hospital.
Now, is your wife following you at this time?
No, and in the meantime, she had our first son. And she was down on her farm in southwest Missouri. They wouldn't give me a leave out of the hospital to see her. She couldn't get up there to see me. So I was in the hospital, bounced between surgical ward and medical ward, and finally became a basket case. They sent me to do rehabilitation and assigned me to command a bunch of German Afrika Korps prisoners. I finally told the doctor, I says, now look, I says, I'm going crazy. Now you got to do something. So the next thing I know, they called me back in the hospital. They sent me up to the retirement board. And they had a diagnosis of post-concussion syndrome. I think that's what they called shell shock in World War I. The board turned that down because it didn't qualify for whatever they had. So they brought me back to the hospital in my ward for another week, and then they took me up again, but they didn't tell me a thing. So they made me get in a wheelchair, wheeled me in. I could walk, but they made me get in the wheelchair, wheeled me in before this retirement board of colonels and all, and presented my case. And the next thing I know, the guy says, anxiety neurosis. And I said, my God, they're going to Section 8 me. So they presented the case, and finally the chief of the board, he said to me, he said, do you have anything to say? I says, I'm so confused right now, I don't know whether I'm coming or going. He says, remove the patient. And they had their apparently decision made. They wheeled me back in, and they said, you are hereby retired from the United States Army on physical disability. I said to the doctor, I said, where did you pick up this anxiety neurosis? I said, I put in all this service and, wind up at Section 8. He says, George, he says, that was the only diagnosis we could get. It covers anything. It'll even cover appendicitis. He says, we had to get you out. And apparently at that time, the casualties were so bad, they had to make beds ready, and they just more or less were shuffling guys out as soon as they could. So I went down to he told me, he says, there's something wrong with you. We don't know what it is. Go down to your wife's farm and take it easy. Well, I went down there. I'll wind this up real quick. I stayed at my wife's farm for 6 months, and I finally said to her, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die with my boots on. I went back to the Colorado School of Mines, finished school. Some 10 years later, in Gary, Indiana, when I was working in the steel mills, the doctor says, something's wrong with you. He says, I'm going to send you to an eminent neurosurgeon in Chicago. He made his claim to fame as separating the Brody Siamese twins. He examined me, he says, when were you treated for your broken neck? I says, I was never treated. He says, I can't believe you're alive. So the end diagnosis was I had whiplash injuries in 3 cervical vertebrae. He says, I wouldn't operate on you with a 10-foot pole now. He says, I'll teach you how to live with it. So I'm here today at 84.
Wow. That's amazing.
So that's just about my tale.
Okay, I want you real quick to just mention that the names of your children.
Yes. The name of my children are, my son is the eldest. His name is Michael. Craig Bodine.
Okay.
I have 2 daughters. The eldest one is Doris Ann Graham. She lives out in Ottawa. My son is a social worker at Moccasin Bend. He came out of basket case out of Vietnam. Okay, my youngest daughter is in the media, and she lives in, her name is Lynn Marie Iez, and she lives in Springfield, Illinois, and she's a national sales manager for 3 TV stations.
Okay. And do you have any grandchildren?
I have 1 granddaughter, and she's a unfortunate case. And I have 2 great-grandchildren. This is a disaster. One of them was born by some guy that was shot and killed, fathered, and the other by some guy, I guess the state of Florida is still looking for him. But anyway, they're sweet kids. They're one's 11, and I think the other's going on 12 right now. We're doing the best we can with them. The granddaughter is impossible right now.
Is she in town or is she?
She's in town. I love her. She's a sweet kid, but there's my son who works at Moccasin Bend said she's a sociopath. She can't there's some defect up there she can't rationalize. So we're making the best of it.
Yeah. Before we get to the pictures, is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover in the interview? Any final thoughts about how the war has affected you, or how your time in the service affected your life?
Yes. I guess I was a very lucky person. I seem to, I'll put it this way, all my friends in that special service force on December 3rd were all wiped out. It seemed that I just, before a disaster would happen, they'd move me someplace else. It's made me think about it a lot. Not of my own doing, but I'd get my orders. Okay, I just thank God I'm alive. As far as war and everything, I'm not a big champion of war. I really appreciate what our armed forces are doing. I think they're great. I'm a champion of them. But I don't want them to be misused. I respect all these fellows, and I don't want them to be sent into a war just for some political thing. I don't like war, and some of these friends of mine in the force, who I got together, I belong to the Force Association, told me all their things in Italy. And there's got to be a good reason for war as far as I'm concerned. So let's say I admire our military, but politically, I hope they're never misused.
And that's a picture of your wife, right?
Right.
And that's the commando group?
Yeah, that was my platoon.
Okay, that's your platoon. And where are you in the...
We were at the Mike Horse Mine up in near Lincoln, Montana.
At Fort Henry, William Henry Harris?
Yeah. I might say we're the only outfit that was ever allowed to wear shorts as our uniform.